Dr. Stocks, thank you so much for joining us. An all new topic, electronic gadgets, the dark side thereof. I didn't know this. I'm starting to read about it just recently. Being exposed to blue light from a cell phone or a tablet has a negative impact on our sleep. How so?
Well, I think it's the same phenomenon that astronomers and people who want night vision have recognized for a long time. And that is that our eyes are more sensitive to the blue end of the spectrum. And so if you want to be able to be a good astronomer, you'll protect yourself from lights, particularly the blue end of the spectrum, and you'll do things like covering your light sources with a red filter or wearing red sunglasses, so to speak. I believe it's the same exact phenomenon. We've long known that the brain clock is set by bright light. So exposure to light in the early morning kind of sets the stage for a time 12 to 14 hours later where we're ready to go to sleep. That's what tells the brain that it's time to go to bed. And that clock is set by exposure to light at various hours. We have, again, long know that if you expose the person to bright light in the late afternoon or evening, that's going to reset the clock, and it is actually going to interfere with being able to go to sleep. Well, it turns out the part of the spectrum of color, think of the rainbow from red all the way up to ultraviolet or blue, the eyes are more sensitive to the blue end of the spectrum. So light sources which don't seem to be very bright, cell phones, tablets, are still very capable of exposing us to the end of the spectrum that resets the clock. So what we know is it's not so much an issue of color, it's an issue of light exposure, and that our eyes just happen to be more sensitive to blue light. What we know is that watching TV, reading, playing on your cell phone, doing a lot of computer work can interfere with a good night's sleep.
Huh? Interesting. Many people don't realize that poor sleep, lack of sufficient sleep, poses a real risk to health. I mean, they think of it more as a nuisance. So let's go over what kind of serious problems arise from lack of good sleep.
Well, certainly quality of life is impaired. When you wake up tired and you have not gotten a good night's sleep, it's going to affect our mood, so things like depression and anxiety can be more of a problem. When we wake up tired and we're sleepy through the day, issues of safety and alertness are affected. So students in the classroom or businessmen trying to remember somebody's name and phone number can be harmed. And simply driving is affected. People who are not awake and alert don't make good drivers. They have many more car accidents. Now, there are other more direct health problems that can occur as a result of rotten sleep. When we wake up frequently in the middle of the night, there's a lot of tendency to go to the refrigerator and eat. And so weight gain becomes related to rotten sleep, and then weight gain itself can be associated with difficulties of blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease. So a good night's sleep can affect us, or I should say a bad night's sleep can affect us in numerous ways.
Okay. So we now know that being exposed to blue light by our electronic devices, which are ubiquitous, in an evening, not so good on a given evening. But what about the long-term hazards attended to being exposed to blue light?
Well, I don't know that there's any direct consequence of blue light per se. I think the fact that blue light is particularly prone to interfering with our sleep, and as we said, the consequences of rotten sleep can have difficulties with quality of life, weight gain, diabetes, blood pressure, heart disease. It's not blue light directly, it's blue light's interference with sleep that ends up with the health consequences.
So, this is not good news for your typical teenager who is prone to text at night. What are the findings? What do we know about this impact with the fact that every kid is tethered to his or her cell phone?
Well, the problem with our electronics is aggravated perhaps by issues of directly interfering with sleep through light exposure, blue lights, etc. But all of these electronic devices make it much more significant that the child's going to bed as a teenager is interfered with. You know, in my youth, I might be able to sneak the phone and stay on it late in the evening, and you know, my parents would know if I were on the phone. But now the teenager can do all of these things in their own bed. The teenage years are already associated with a tendency towards going to bed later and later and having difficulty getting up in time for school. When you add all the new electronic excuses for ruining sleep, it becomes even more of a problem.
Is there any link to depression?
Well, rotten sleep itself is mood altering. When you wake up tired, what we know is that people who get poor quality sleep are more likely to have difficulties managing issues of mood, be it anxiety or depression. The teenage years are already a time of great angst as we have to learn how to become adults and manage our own affairs, responsible for our own affairs, and moving away from parents who we don't want anymore, but they are needed all the more during those years.
So not only are we spending more time with our electronic devices, our gadgets, our iPads and our phones, we're spending less time outside. What impact on sleep?
Well, the clock in the brain is set by bright light exposure. If you go outside, ideally first thing in the morning, that is the optimal way to set the clock for the next night's sleep. If you never go outside, you don't set that clock as well. And as we age, by the way, the clock becomes a little more difficult to set in the first place. But if the teenager stays indoors all day and then in the evening time exposes themselves to longer and longer periods of time, the teenager is particularly prone then to interfering with their ability to get a good restful night of sleep, and as every parent knows, even more difficulty getting them up in the morning.
The operating system update to my iPhone, which I just got and just read about, is apparently addressing this problem. It says that one of the things it's going to do as we get later in the day into the evening, the color spectrum on the phone is going to shift to the warmer end of the spectrum. There are apps that claim to filter the blue light on devices. Any potential for these things or any harm that could come from them?
I don't think there's any harm that will come from it. I do think that it's probably more fad than reality in terms of the benefit.
Besides just not using our electronic devices in the evening, are there other things that we can do, other ways to reduce or offset the risks of blue light?
Well, most of our TVs have controls in terms of brightness that are there, but we rarely touch. Our phones, the brightness of the screen, and our notebooks and computers, that brightness is easily adjusted right at hand. And what I would suggest is that in the evening hours that you try to keep the screen as dim as you can manage. That will make the exposure to the eye and to the brain of light less of a problem, so as to reset the clock less vigorously. Watching TV, that's a different story, because few of us are going to get up and adjust the settings of the brightness. And none of our TVs, to my awareness, as yet, will do that auto adjustment. I do think there's opportunities to make it less of a problem, but the best solution, read a book.
Well, what about things like getting more exposure to natural light, vitamin D, blue blocking sunglasses, things like that?
Well, I don't think many of us are going to be putting on red sunglasses to look at our laptop screens or our phones in the evening time, unless we're just about to go outside and enjoy a night of astronomy. But some of those suggestions might have some value. I think the real long-term solution is be aware that light is not a good thing in the evening time, particularly bright light, and to minimize that as best as possible. There are a lot of good things that we may be able to learn from this in terms of managing our sleep, but going outside, enjoying the day's sunshine and the clean air, pollen not counting, those are all good things both for overall health and in particular for good sleep health.
Well, here's a purely hypothetical. If electricity were somehow just go away, the electric light vanish, to what extent would sleep problems go away?
Dramatically so, I believe. We just don't read of our ancestors back before Thomas Edison as having much of a problem apart from poor health with issues of going to bed late, getting up at 9 o'clock in the morning, at least not as a common problem. It must have been somewhat still true because Franklin wouldn't have said early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise.
True. So, electronic devices aside, some general good ideas, good steps to help us get a good night's sleep.
Try to go to bed with a ritual. In other words, to ease off the day's activities and worries, to get your exercise done every day, but not right before bedtime. To try to go to bed in a pattern of relaxation, be it reading, praying, meditating, reading a good book, a hot bath, something to relax and wind down. To get the concerns and worries and the arguments over with before you go to bed. To try to go to bed at the same time most every night, and that's not always possible. Some people do have babies. Try to get up out of bed in the morning at the same time, regardless of when you went to bed the night before, and regardless of how much sleep you got the night ahead of you or behind you. Every day to exercise a little bit, every day make a commitment to going out and enjoying the sun. Those are probably the wisest recommendations in terms of what any individual can do to maximize their chances of a good night's sleep.
And not a single one of them sounds unpleasant.
Not a one.
Very well. Doctor, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you.